You're calling for former Prime Minister Dame Jacinda Ardern, Labour leader Chris Hipkins, and former Health Minister Aisha Verrall, and I think Grant Robertson too, to front this Royal Commission of Inquiry into COVID-19. They have refused. Why is it important for you that they do front?
Well, I think the argument is that justice should not only be done but be seen to be done. If there's going to be a lot of questions for them, I think people should be able to see what the questions are and how they answer them. That gives you a sense that we know that the Royal Commission got to the bottom and asked all the questions that we thought should have been asked. We can judge, what the final product is. So there's a lot of benefits to it being done. Whether or not the Royal Commission can force them to is another question, because the Royal Commission has to use its powers for a purpose. And if the other guys can go to court and say, well, we gave you all this information privately, then I guess they might be able to block a requisition or a demand that they appear, if you like. So, whether they can be forced is another question, and it seems like the Commission says they can't, and if that's the case, then, you can't mess with the independence of a Royal Commission. But I just make the point that these guys were so happy to stand at the so-called podium of truth and be in our living rooms at 1 o'clock every day after day after day, and now they've suddenly got a bit shy.
Yeah, well, I saw that the barrister involved in this said that if they did appear, it would only be performative, and I thought that's kind of ironic given the 1 o'clock press briefings, the fear-mongering that went with that, as we now know.
It never had a problem with being performative before, and I think people forget the scale of what they did. I mean, families separated, still traumatised from being separated from funerals, deaths, births, serious illness, businesses that closed, children missing school, people with mental health challenges. It's difficult to overstate. I don't think the government of New Zealand has ever done anything as dramatic, except maybe sending troops to Europe in 2 world wars.
How damaging is it to public trust when key decision makers during the pandemic now refuse to answer questions in person? I think people demand it, don't they?
Well, I think what's important is to recognise what's the purpose of all this. It's ultimately to be better prepared for the next pandemic, and there will be another one. I mean, if you look through the history, after World War I, there was the Spanish flu. There was a terrible flu that went through Hong Kong in the 1950s. There was threats from bird flu in the 90s, never quite came about. Ebola's been terrible in Africa. I mean, there will be another airborne flu type virus that will do a lot of harm and cause a lot of panic around the world. And it's maybe not this year, probably not next year, probably not this decade, but it will happen. And we need to know that we're prepared and that the citizens are prepared to be able to say, look, you guys are asking us to do all this stuff. This happened before there was a full inquiry, and it turns out it wasn't such a good idea. I think I can claim I was one of, if not the main opposition politician through much of the pandemic. And, it was very difficult to point out what the government was doing was wrong when there was no other reference point. Because what did you compare it with? Is that if we don't get this Royal Commission right, then we're not giving that gift to the future generations who may face similar circumstances. And I think in terms of trust, which, sorry, I know was your question, it certainly erodes your trust in these guys, because 1 minute they're everywhere, next minute they're hiding.
So ACT is supporting the recalling of the Royal Commission, aren't you, and perhaps holding some kind of separate inquiry? You've got a petition out. What does that petition mean, and why is that important?
Well, we want to see how many people out there lend their voice to getting them to actually appear. And we want to go out and say, actually, thousands, tens of thousands, hopefully hundreds of thousands of people want these guys to reconsider. And what these 4 former ministers, Jacinda, Grant Robertson, Jacinda's little helper, or Chris Hipkins as he prefers to be known, and Aisha Verrall, should actually front up. So the point is to put pressure on them, show how many people actually want them to. I think that there needs to be a display of public will here, but kind of a civilised one, not the kind of hijinks that you see from Te Pāti Māori and the Greens.
Chris Hipkins said he's already fronted regarding COVID-19 multiple times and he's freely available to the media at Parliament Bridge. And he reckons that's enough. In fact, that when he was being interviewed by the Commission, they ran out of questions, so there's no point in fronting something separate. What do you make of that talk?
Well, a couple of things there. Number one, if politicians fronting to the media is all the accountability that we need, then I don't think that there needs to be a Royal Commission. But of course, that's not true. We have Royal Commissions for a very specific purpose. The second point is, he may have given evidence in private. They may have stopped asking questions. We don't know. Is that because they didn't have any questions? Is that because he answered the questions really well? Is that because the questions were so hopeless that they gave up in despair and said, don't worry, we're not going to talk to you anymore? There could be at least three reasons why they ran out of questions. Or, you know what, maybe they didn't run out of questions. Maybe he's just saying that. That's the point. We don't know, because we're just having to trust his word.
David, is this enough, in your view, to sink the Labour Party in the next election, or will the economy still be the main focus? Because you can almost guarantee where this is going to head now. I mean, this is just gold material for the current government, isn't it? But then Labour would say, well, we've still got economic problems, and by judging by the latest polls, there are problems for the coalition government to consider here.
Yeah, difficult to know. I'm an ACT voter. I've only ever voted ACT. So people who will decide this are people who, for whatever reason, I know you're out there, are thinking it might be a good idea to vote Labour. And what I'd say to those people is, look, if you trust Chris Hipkins to solve economic problems, can you trust that he's going to front up, or is he just going to be there when it suits him? Because that's the simple question. Notwithstanding that we can make a good argument that it's their borrowing, their costs, their restrictions that have put New Zealand in its current economic slump, which we're battling to dig New Zealand out of, along with a whole lot of battlers up and down the country. But if you can't trust the guy on something like showing up and being publicly accountable, why would you trust him to fix the economy?
And speaking of the economy, of course, this comes just days after Treasury found that I think it was almost half of the $66 billion spent during COVID was not actually related to COVID-19. I mean, I can't believe that doesn't get more headlines, given the fact that that's a huge number. I mean, arguably, you could also say that the Labour government did a great job when it comes to the wage subsidies and helping people out during the early stages of the pandemic. But it's pretty damning when Treasury's saying, not so good with some of the other stuff that wasn't COVID or pandemic related.
Well, it's one of the reasons I come on your show, Chris, because I don't believe that the New Zealand media have put enough emphasis on something that really affects New Zealanders' lives. The fact that they spent half the money after the worst of COVID was over, I think what it shows is that they actually just lost their sense of the value of a dollar. I was there, it must have been about the 23rd of March. It was the last day that Parliament sat. I think that was a Tuesday. We went into lockdown on the Thursday, if I remember rightly. And it was a very sombre tone. And the only business that Parliament did was vote $52.5 billion of extra supply so the government could keep running if Parliament wasn't able to meet. Because you've got to remember, at that point, we didn't know as much as we knew later. There was reasonable people could think maybe this really will be a major catastrophe that will kill hundreds of thousands of people in New Zealand. So I remember that. And Grant Robertson joked, well, I won't spend it all at once. But the truth is, after we basically chalked up spending $52.5 billion in about 5 minutes, they just got a taste for spending that was out of all proportion to the value of a dollar, and that carried on. Basically until the people put themselves out of their misery by putting him out of government.
Recent polls, let's just discuss a recent poll where you said in response to that, and I quote, we're in the middle of a repair job and you don't judge an electrician or mechanic when they're halfway through fixing it. I get what you're saying. So when should voters judge the coalition government's performance then?
Well, they'll judge us at the next election. That's the way it works. But I believe that if you look at the cycle we're going through, So, inflation peaked in 2022 September. We got elected in 2023 September. By that time, inflation was down to 5.5. We got it down to 2.5. We got it down to 2.2 actually. It's ticked back up to 2.7. But inflation is now back from a peak of 7% to a 1 to 3% band. That's happened. But the thing that follows that is the interest rates. So they got as high as 5.5. We've now got them down to 3.25. I think there'll be another couple of cuts, but I could be wrong, but I think they'll cut it, will be down in the twos for interest rates. That means that people's mortgages are going to have a 4 in front of them, and that means that people have got hundreds of dollars more than they had a year ago in their household budgets if they got a decent whack of mortgage. That means people are spending again, and it means that people are hiring again. So all of this stuff is happening in sequence. You go back to 2022, you look at the spending blowout, you look at the inflation, you look at the interest rates, you look at the household spending, you look at the job creation. It just all happens in a sequence. There's not a lot you can do to make it go faster. Some people say, you should go and spend a lot more money, borrow more money overseas, spend it in the New Zealand economy. That's how we got here. We're not going to do that. But by this time next year, I expect that cycle will have continued and will be in a better place than we are now.
Just briefly, I know we better go, but the ACT Party took the Christchurch Press to the Press Council over a complaint that they didn't ask you for comment on a particular story on school lunches. The ACT Party won on that. What was your motivation for doing that? And of course, this just comes after the Christchurch Press is under fire for not acknowledging or omitting a rather serious, what am I trying to say here? Somebody who went to the Christchurch Press presenting as a story that they were offended by about an ECAN councillor, but didn't say that they were actually aligned to a particular candidate, which changed the context. What do you make of that? And what do you make of the ruling from the ACT Party in regards to your complaint?
Look, I think Sinead Boucher, the publisher of Stuff, needs to come out and actually say, is this acceptable? And if not, at a management level, what is she doing to raise the standards in her publications? Because if you look at the school lunch thing, we didn't just complain because they didn't come to us for comment. I mean, it's a nice thing to do to try and get both sides of the story, but they don't have to. The main issue that we had is that the journalist, so-called, was actually one who had just a few weeks ago been working for the Health Coalition Aotearoa, a lobby group who were doing everything they could to undermine this healthy school lunch program. And she basically started writing as a Christchurch Press journalist and saying that basically doing the same thing she'd done as a lobbyist without declaring any interest. Now, if people had known, this person, weeks or maybe it was months ago, was working as a Health Coalition lobbyist, issuing statements and lobbying against the school lunch, program, then the person reading the story might think, that puts a different slant on it, but they didn't say that. That was the real issue, and the fact that they didn't bother coming to me for the other side of the story. That's the cherry on the top. As far as the reporting on the mayor there, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but what it sounds like is just general sloppiness. And unfortunately, these are the things that erode people's trust in media. The person that needs to stand up and be accountable for that is Sinead Boucher, because she's all busy saying that the government should force internet companies to give her money because the media are providing a public good. Where is she now when that public good doesn't seem to be quite as good as promised?